Welcome everyone. Welcome back to the live stream that we are following from past few weeks. And like always, this is Atul from Geeky Ants. And uh, today we are going to discuss another topic, which is a very important topic as like when React applications are considered. And the topic for today is actually, you guessed it right, it is when to use a state management solution in React. So we are going to discuss about why a state management, when to use a state management, and definitely how. And for that, we have two rock stars from Geeky Ants, Sanket and Shankodeep.
Hello.
Let's welcome them.
Hi everyone. Hi Sanket, hi Atul.
Great. Good to be here again.
Great to be talking to you guys. I actually learn a lot whenever we speak together. Let's see what we learn today.
This is my favorite topic. So I've been talking on state management from a long time, and I usually have a controversial opinion on state management versus like what's famous. So, but I think let's talk about like what are the different opinions and why exactly we need a particular thing, or which one fits what scenario, something like that.
Sure. So we'll be going through a lot of related topics, and we'll be expecting a lot of questions from the audience. And let's keep answering them and getting to know their ideas on it too. So before that, before we jump on to the actual topic, let's recap on what we actually learned in our previous session. What we spoke about was what are the different advanced React patterns that we saw in the last session, and these were the 5 of the advanced React patterns that we explored: the compound components pattern, the control props pattern, the custom hooks pattern, props getters pattern, and then the state reducer pattern. And we explored how to implement these particular patterns, and also we explored the pros and cons of each.
Yeah, I think it was a pretty informative session last time, and we were lucky that we got a very nice article, Atul, from Alexis, and also it was based on Kenzie Dodd's talks as well. So I think, yeah, after seeing all those patterns, I think we have been using these patterns here and there, but now everybody knows like what are those called, and we can totally use this as a jargon when we are talking or building components. So I think that's really good. Yeah.
And let's see how we can make use of these patterns, and if these patterns help us with state management solutions or not. So this would be one of our exploration point in today's session.
All right.
So Sanket, this is your favorite topic. So why do you say this is your favorite topic?
Just a second. I think there's some problem with the layout, Atul. So the layout was totally fine. Yeah. I think we can move out. We can be 3 of us.
Great.
There are 4 people. There's some problem. Okay. Yeah.
All right.
Atul, we can show the screen. I think the format was totally fine with 3 people on the side.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. Great. So why is it? I think this is one of the core parts of whenever you are doing a front end or full stack development, right? Because a lot of the major part of your app is handled by the data that is driven, that drives your UI, and React doesn't define that. So it's only half of it. React defines like how the UI is updated whenever the data changes. But React doesn't talk about like how you manage that and how you structure your application in terms of like files, folders, or state management, right? So I think this is a very important topic, and this also drives the entire architecture of your app.
Correct. So React gives us the the control on the UI part, and to control whatever we have, from the data perspective, whatever we have in the application, we need to introduce a state management solution. So let's first talk about what is state management, and for that matter, what is a state of the application.
I think Shanko can answer that better.
Yeah. So for me, when I look at an app, so anything that you see in the screen, anything that has an UI is derived from state. By that I mean, if you are on a shopping website and you see the cart will have a state. You see the list of products, the products will have a state from where it is derived from. If you look at the product data, that is a state. You look at a form when you try to enter something, that is a state. So direct mapping for me would be anything that you see on the screen is a result of state. So that's how I try to map it. So how are we going to use that state, whether that is global state or the local state of the component, is what we are going to discuss today. But yeah, that's my 2 cents. This is what I feel state is, that it is directly related to what we see on the UI.
Interesting. Yeah. So the data part of the app that drives your UI is the state management. Right.
Yes.
Great. So why is it important to manage state of an application? Let's talk about that.
Yeah. Just a second, huh? Shanko, you can take that.
Yeah, I'll take that. So what happens is, in certain cases, state is directly mappable, as in with UI, you can directly map one-to-one the state with the UI. But what might happen is, in certain cases, there might be a requirement of the same state being required in another component, maybe at a lower level or at a higher level. And then that has to be the same state. It's not like you can create a duplicate state and use that, because then what happens if the state in component A changes, then we'll need the same state in component B as well. That is when the requirement for state management arises, is, I would say, when we need to share state between components or screens, whichever we want to call it. So Atul, what do you think? Like, is this a correct definition of why we need state management, or can it be put in better words?
I think, state management, becomes important. The management of the state becomes important when we have a lot of data that is being shared throughout the application actually. And when there is, when the application is not much huge, we might go away. Basically, before we had single page applications or applications like that, the state the data was being managed by the server, and what was being displayed on the front end side was already statically generated on the server and then rendered. So state management actually became important when we started pulling out things from the server side and started putting things on the front end. Does that make sense, Sanket?
Yeah, totally. It does make sense. I was just typing things, whatever you were saying, so that I think we can document this better.
Yeah,
great. Yeah, I think that's a great point, Atul, that state management automatically becomes very important when you are doing a lot of things on the front end. And yeah, so that's a very good point. And shared data, as Shanko mentioned, is equally important. So what else? Like, I think other than shared data, I think shared data, there are some examples for sure. Like say the routing is something that is common across your entire app. Something like, say, user auth data, that if the user is logged in. So these things, I think, should be stored in a shared environment. but I think it's equally important for local state management, like component based. Like if you have a form, or if you have something like a toggle button, so in that case as well, we should have some sort of state management. But okay, I think that I'm getting to the next question, that's like local versus like the global state management, right?
Yeah, so you mentioned local state and global state. Let's, jump on that and then discuss a bit about. What when do you say when you say local, what do you mean by it? And when we say global, what does that actually mean?
When I say local, it's localized to a component. So when we use something like use state, that's a local state management, something that other components need not care about, that's local. So something like, say, a toggle button, or something like, say, a form data, or anything of that sort, that is local. And something that is shared across your app or between the components, that is like global data. Or we can have like different levels of data or state management. One is like totally localized inside a component, then something that is shared between two components, but say the parent holds the data, and the communication happens via, say, from the child, it goes to the parent, and then it is reflected to some other component. So it's called lifting the state up. But when we lift the entire state up to the global level, to the app level, I think that is global data. So I think we should always go from local to global, and not like just start from global data and use it in different components. And I think that's also something that people have been doing, and which makes the entire app a bit unmanageable, I would say, if you start like polluting the global like main store. But I think I have like, there are different opinions on this point. When it comes to something like Redux, you have to push everything in a central global state. But I'm open to like understand this in depth. Maybe Shanko can add his points there.
No, I'm completely fine with it. So that's one. Even when we were discussing earlier, I had this point in mind that how about a combination of use state plus something like a Redux, right? Because some, like you said, something like a basic toggle which is only going to be used in that specific screen, which we know that it is only going to be used in that specific screen. I don't see a point of it being pulled all the way up to a central store for whatever reason, because that way we are polluting the central state with stuff it does not really need. So I'm on board when we say something like, okay, card data, I'm fine with it, we can put it in a global store because we need this data in separate parts of our app. But then when we are talking about really screen specific or component specific data or state, I would say that use state is like sufficient for that. So I would say a combination of both local plus a global, whatever may it be, MSG, Redux, or Zustand, which is the new kid on the block, works well for me. But yeah, everyone has their experience, and that is what the more articles you read, the more different patterns we learn, and then there is no correct way to do these things, as we know. So that's always there.
Yeah,
Perfect.
definitely a combination definitely works, I think. So let me just add it in the slide. Atul, can you just focus, because I'm also typing on the right side and that's going out of the screen. So
just a second.
If we zoom out and then move pan a bit to the right,
yeah,
I think
yeah,
we'll
I
cover
think on
it.
the right side it makes more sense. Command minus should just work fine. Okay, I think this is enough. This is perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
Move everything to the left a bit, Atul, so that, because I don't. Yeah, cool. Okay, great. We're talking about the first point. We've not come to the second one. So yeah. Okay, fine. Use state. Okay, so use state works for most of the cases. For most of the cases, we lift up the state to the parent when needed. Move to global in particular cases. Atul, this is still not visible. You can zoom out a bit. It's fine. Or I'll just move this one here. I think this is better now. Okay, cool. We got it right. Okay, so I'm just summing up everything so that our viewers can just focus on like different things. Okay, moving on to the next part. Okay, so we have like different cases, right, Shanko?
And like what category we can categorize them in, like how can we manage the state of a form, how can we manage the state of a toggle button? Do we need to keep it local, or we can move things at the global level?
Shankar, what do you think?
So for forms, I think the best solution would be, so if we are using a two-line form, we need username, password, and just a button to submit. Then I think use state is going to work for most of the cases. But then, as and when our forms grow, if we have a login wizard or something like that, when we have dependent fields, and then we have two pages where we're just filling forms, then I think we should look at one of the pre-built libraries that have done all the hard work for us, by which I mean something like Formic. I have very good experience with Formic and Redux, React Hook Form both, not Redux, React Hook Form both. So anything, if it's a simple form, like I said, 2-3 fields and a button, that should be fine for use state, from my experience I'm saying. But for more complex, I would lean on the side of something tried and tested along the lines of Redux form or something. Sorry, Formic or React Hook Form. So Sangeet, what is your experience? How have you found dealing with form state?
Yeah, form state, I think it should be localized for sure. But when you need more of like shared things, even in that case, if it does not affect the routing, I believe that it should be lifted up in a parent and then managed at the parent level. But again, using a structure with something like use state, like usually forms are like it gets to a point where you need to add say array of objects or nested objects and things like that, and it's when you need a bit of structure. uh, Using something like use reducer works for most of the cases, but there are other parts of it like handling the submitting state or something like invalidation state, error states. For that, I think we always need to fall back to a specific like these form libraries because they solve the problem for us. uh, I'm But I think keeping it local as far as we can is a good option. But moving to like really global level, I wouldn't recommend that until unless it affects other parts of your app. uh, like we recently built a form library on top of Mobex State tree. It's called FormST, and I'm a big fan of MST because you can just structure your data and also write all the validation logic and everything related to that data in an isolated environment. What these libraries like Formic and Redux Hook Form, they are somewhat coupled with React, which is a bit of resistance for me, which causes because uh, I would like to treat my data as data, and I wouldn't just get in pieces of say event handling or anything of React or DOM level manipulation with my data level thing. So in that case, I really like something like Mobex State tree. Uh, but yeah, Formic is equally good. React Hook Forms is performant as it skips the React's render cycle altogether, right? So choose what works for you, I would say, but still just know the internals a bit as well.
So I'm thinking of a use case. Say for example, how do we put the auth data into our state tree? Probably we keep it at the global level, right? Say now, say for example, we have a form which is maybe say the profile form where we can update profile data and things like that, and the data is actually received in the auth data that we have for the application, and the form is being populated from that particular node of the data tree. So in that case, uh, like how do we manage the data in that case? Where do we keep uh, in the tree, keep the data in the tree?
You mean the form data or the auth data?
uh, the form data is actually dependent on the auth data, because the form is the profile form, maybe say for a social media application.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that is dependent on the auth data.
Hmm. So, but I'll still keep it local to the component, and because that particular component itself wouldn't mount, right? And see, any data in the front end, it's like available to the end users. So there's no question of like adding security level, right? Because users have got the data. And then it depends on like if you are doing something like profile settings, right? That is only for the auth user itself. So that that's another form, and that's a form that any user can go ahead and use it and edit it. So that can be handled like any other form, I would say.
Right. So, I mean, we are getting a lot of questions from the audience too. So, Abhinandan has a question on the same line. Say, what he is asking is, when using Redux, should we directly use the data pulled from the global state, or we first put it in the local state and then use it?
Shanko has a lot of experience with Redux.
No, I think we can take it directly from the global state, right? I can't think of a reason why we would need to copy that state to local. Because what I feel is that then we have two copies of the same state, right? And then if say, and then whenever we fetch data and we update the global state, then every time we'll need to do the same in our local state as well, which might not be required because the global state will already be available to our component as props. So like
I
that's
have a
how
different use case. I have a different use case, Shanko. I think I got the question. Atul, can you flash the question? Yeah, okay. See, what happens is like, say, the global data has the logged in user information, right? So the logged in user has got a name and email address and something like that. And I want to say edit the profile data. So on the screen, I would say the name and then show the name of the user in an input box. So if we directly update the global data, then the logged in user would change. Like if say I'm flashing my name Sanket Sahu at different chat boxes or in the profile, if we don't copy the data in the form and then let the user update it, so as soon as I update things in the form, it would update it everywhere. So that creates problem. So when we want a stage of editing and then a stage of committing the data when we click on the submit button. So in that case, I think it's a two-step, two different steps. First, we need to copy from the global state, make it available for the user to edit it, and when the user clicks on the submit button, then take the forms data and then sync it to the global state so that it updates everywhere. So in that case, we'll do it, but it really depends on the use case. So I think that's a very good use case scenario and good question.
And that's where sometimes we face problems in the UI where, say, when we start editing the data in the global state from the form, and if the same value is being used somewhere, say as a I mean in the header of the application where we are showing the name, we don't understand from where it changed, even though we didn't actually save the data from the form.
Yes. I think that's why we just stressed upon it in the last point, saying that form data is best kept local to that component so that it does not have side effects throughout the app. So even if we use something like Formic, it is still local to that specific form and it's not going to mess with data elsewhere. So yeah, that's a good point. So whenever we are dealing with forms, I would say it's best not to mess with the global state because that is the local, that is not being saved to the server yet. Yeah, that's just the client state. So if we change it there, it might have effects on the other components. So that's there.
Right. So how about animations? I mean, Auth-data we spoke about. We have to keep it global. So how about animations?
I think animation, again, it depends. Yeah. If you want to interrupt the animation based on a global data, then probably we'll keep the animation data as well global. So, but if you want to, most of the animations are not interruptible and they are like, okay, this happens, then just animate, right? So for like most of the use cases, it should be local according to me. And when you want to interrupt that animation from an external hook or say socket, then probably make it global.
Yeah, the one use case I could think of is maybe in React Native terms, we have a scroll view and the header is not in the header is a separate component and the scroll view is in a separate component. So we need to listen to the scroll event listener of the scroll view from the header, which is in another component. So that's where we might need to share data a bit, but that's not, we should never ideally share animation state is what I feel. Maybe move the
I think
header
we should.
here.
I think we should stop taking sides for most of the things.
Yeah.
Great. I think Auth-data we have already discussed, Atul, right?
Yeah,
It's
it's
mostly
global.
going to be global because the entire app depends on it.
Right.
Yeah. Shopping cart is a good example. Yeah. Go ahead.
The Shankar lot
Atul has already added global there, so
No, it
I
was.
would-
I'm editing the file.
editing it.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's all there. Now, like I said, shopping cart in my mind, when I think of shopping cart, I see that being used in a lot of places. If in the header we see a count of the number of items that are there in your cart. So if you go to the cart page, then of course you see it. And then in Amazon, there's a sidebar to the right which tells you the items that are there in your shopping cart. So that I think is a very good example of why we need global store instead of populating every screen with shopping data. So that in my mind would go to the global store.
So when we say global, do we actually mean global to the application or global to the, I mean, a component? Maybe say a parent component. I mean,
No, I
people
think
might get
no, global means
confused a bit.
accessible everywhere in the app. That's what we mean when yes, we are saying global.
Okay, so when we are saying a shopping cart, I mean, when we are taking shopping cart as an example, I mean, do we need to share data from the shopping cart to other components too, which is not actually related?
But Shanko just mentioned that you might need to show the count of the items in the shopping cart, and other components may be affected depending on like how many things are there in your shopping cart, or maybe show a coupon code. So I think it's mostly global.
Makes sense. Makes proper sense. Yeah. So how about tables now? Tables, grids.
Sanket, you want to take that?
I think anything that just fetches from the server and shows on the screen should be handled by a hook or something that directly speaks to an endpoint, and it shouldn't go in the state at all, but it should go in the local state ideally. So we can use a hook, something like use SWR, or one of the hooks that comes with GraphQL, Apollo GraphQL. So we can directly use that and just fetch it and show it. So until unless you are not sharing that, then I think just local is fine. I think with the use of hooks, this vanishes. This entire discussion goes away, right? Because when we have something like use SWR, that's a hook to fetch the data, right? To fetch some data from from an endpoint, but it also has a cache layer of its own. So that also works like a global state. And so yeah, with the use of hooks, local and global is sort of mixed now. It feels like it's local, but it's actually being fetched from a global store, right? So I would type local here mainly because it's more of like just fetching and showing on the screen. Shanko, what's your inputs?
Yeah, I agree, because something like the table data that we're just discussing, it is going to be local to that screen, right? And also use SWR and React query for that matter. They provide us with an out of the box cache which we can use in other components if required. So I think that is a very good example of where we can use something like, so this is what we call server side caching, as in server state. So we have client state and we have server state. So this is where I think this falls in the category of server state, where we need to fetch data and show it and maybe persist it in other screens as well. But yeah, with the use of hooks, I think it becomes very easy to share data. So I'm with you on this one. Also, it's interesting looking at the list that we have: global, local. But it's not necessarily going to be in this order everywhere, right? So just for everyone who's looking at it to not draw conclusions out of this, saying that in that video I saw that guy said it has to be global, so I'll keep it in global. So
I think we should just write it somewhere and just keep it like, don't draw conclusions. Okay.
Yes,
So
yes.
I'm just going to delete this and just write, it depends.
Right. Perfect answer.
Okay. And then just make it large and bold so that everything, it depends. Okay.
No, but it's good that we had the discussion and that people should know that this is how we should think and how we should approach before
Yeah.
reaching to a conclusion. So
Correct. It's more of like how we are reaching to conclusion or the path to the decision, that rather than like saying, okay, this works and this doesn't.
yes, yes.
Correct. All right, let's move on.
So we have Anshul who is asking how to effectively manage WebSocket connections in a React app. So this could be another example where do we keep such data in our store?
I think the question that we need to answer is, how does it affect your app? Does it affect just one component? And when that component unmounts, do you see that socket connection going off? When that component mounts, do you want to establish a socket connection, or is it with the entire app? And if it's with the entire app, then we've got a solution that, okay, this is going to, so ideally, let me just draw things here. Maybe I think that will help. Atul, can you scroll to the right just a bit? I'm going to draw here. Okay, great. So say if this is your socket and say if this is your component, if we have something like, okay, this component directly establishes a connection with the socket and then updates. So in this case, we can just use something like use state, and then update that using use effect. And then we can establish the socket connection here, socket connection and updates. So this just works per component. Okay, let me just make it, yeah. But when you have more complex scenarios, when, okay, so case 2 would be something like when you have like multiple components, that's something like this, right? And then all of them are driven by some socket data. So in this case, what we would do is we would change this with something like a global store and let this global store talk to, oops, talk to the sockets. And then the entire connection would happen here in the global store itself. When we are defining that global store, then it also establishes a connection with socket and then updates the global store, and then it reflects on the components. So I think anything like a chat app or something should have this, but the above example, this one, would be more of when you just want to show some status data, say something like a token number that is just local to that particular thing. So this works. What do you think, Shanko, Atul?
Yeah, works perfectly like this. So I hope
Great. I think we can move on.
Let's move on to now. Like we have different use cases when it comes to state management. So we have server-side rendered apps, then we have single page applications. So I mean, how does state management change with these different use cases? So we have Next.js, then we have React applications here as a single page application.
Yeah, Sanket, you want to take that first?
I think you have a good use case, Shanko, right, with the current project that you're working on.
Yes, yes. That's the no.
Go ahead.
Yeah, fine. I'll go first. So the thing I've noticed with single page applications is that since the data and like all the state is client based, right? So everything that you store is driven by your state in the client. There's nothing that is coming if you're using say Next.js or say Gatsby. So I think Next has these functions where you can get server side props, right? So before, which I think it's called prefetching data. So as in when you load an app, you get the data already fetched. So for that case, you really don't need a loading state per se. Because the data, when you reach the page, when the page loads up, it is already there. So states like loading, you might need a loader when you change the route, you go from page A to page B. The transition that it needs to make, you might need to show a loader bar or something. But once you reach a page, you really don't need to have the user wait for that data. But for SPAs, on the other hand, you make the call after you reach, most of the cases. After I mount the component, I make, okay, get me all those data, all the lists. So that is one difference that I have noticed. Sanket, what do you think is this along the lines?
Yeah, I think you're very much on the lines of my thoughts, that if your page wants to load something beforehand, and then we can use server-side data fetching itself. Like in Next.js, we have something like get server-side props function that you can export, and that gets executed on the server. And whatever data it returns in the form of a promise, that gets pre-populated with that component, and the page comes all set in the front end. So you don't really see a loader on the front end and things like that. So in that case, you don't really need a state management solution, because your route, as soon as it hits, fetches the data and shows things on the screen. And most of the apps, like say a blog-based app, or something that is meant for, say, users' data consumption, you might not need a global state management solution or anything like that. But for SPAs, I think we first load the app and then make the queries. But I think most of the confusion starts that React's official doc starts at create React app, and it doesn't have much mention of something like Next.js, which totally makes sense to start off in the first place, right? And that's where people start like shipping their entire app, like really complex and heavy apps, to the users, and then that entire app loads, and the first load itself takes a lot of time, and then it starts making API calls, and then shows something on the screen, which is not good for two things. One is the bundle size explodes. Second, the SEO, like you can't really do SEO when you are building a single page application, because the entire output that Google bot or anything like that receives is just a like script file, JavaScript file. It's nothing on the page when the page first time gets the first response on the server. So I would say, like, if we can push a lot of things to get server-side props of Next.js, that's a very good option. But it has its own downside, but I think it works for most of the cases, and we might not need something like a global state management in that case. Atul, thoughts there?
So I mean, I have a question actually here. So when single page applications are, I mean, in picture, uh, what are the different decision points that we come at when we say we should keep things at global level, or maybe keep, I mean, maybe hydrate the data store, maybe say Redux store at the global level, or keep the data at the route level. So what decision points do we consider there?
I think it boils down to, like, where do you need the data? Like something like shopping cart, put it in the Redux store, make it accessible by all the components. And I think we should talk about this. Like whenever somebody says a global state management solution, people start replacing that with Redux. It should, yeah. So let's use global state management word instead of Redux, because I use something else for most of the time,
So
right?
someone in the comments said this.
I think Redux is not just the state management library, but a coding pattern which makes code more readable and manageable. I think it goes for both the things. Like Redux, people are just using it as a replacement of whenever they want to state something like a state management library. And also the coding pattern, the functional paradigm that Redux has brought into the JavaScript ecosystem, it's really good. And it's more of a philosophy, that's right, rather than an implementation. I agree to that. But anyway, I think let's try to use just a state management word for the rest of the talk, right? So Atul, to answer your question, I think whenever there is something that is shared across route, that should be hydrated in a state management solution, I think.
Perfect.
I think this is a massive topic in itself, like whether to choose SPA or SSR. But I think I should just copy it depends and place it here.
Might as well do it for all the topics then.
Maybe
Also, I think with
maybe-
SSR we have something new called SSG, which is even faster, which compiles everything and build and then it loads up instantly because the data is already there, right? I think Gatsby uses it. Also, Next.js has started supporting it. So first, data that is not changing very frequently. Suppose you have a list of blocks that you want to show and you do not change it often, we can use SSG for that. That would be even quicker. But then, yeah, that's a discussion of client side versus server side rendering, which could be another video on another day. But yeah, that's there.
I think we should. I mean, in another session, we should. List down all different scenarios and then discuss upon that. What solutions to be implemented, could be implemented.
Yes, like what is good for
That's-
X.
yeah.
Yeah, that's there.
That is very. I mean, a huge discussion in itself.
Because the de facto for now, like Sanket says, is we need an app, go and run it from npx create react app my app. So 90% of the time, or maybe more than that, we just use that. We do not see the value of something like Next.js and the options that it provides out of the box. So yeah, that needs some discussion, but some other day.
Right.
Yeah, just to summarize it, I think I've seen a lot of people starting with create React app, then ejecting it, and then adding their custom server-side rendering option along with Node and Express, and then cursing that why didn't they use lazy loading and code splitting, and ultimately they build something like Next.js. So my question is, why not use something like Next.js in the first place?
Interesting point, which is along the lines of what we're speaking of. I've seen people like mess around with context and use state so much that they have built their own Redux, and they say that I don't like Redux, but you look at the app and their patterns, you will see that they have exactly built Redux like in their own app, and then they're like, I'll not use Redux, but then eventually they ended up using context in such a way that it looks like Redux. So
Yeah.
that's also something which happens a lot.
That's what Akash has to say. He says this: why to use Redux when we have something like context already given to us by React? I mean, Redux. I mean, context was introduced way after when React became a lot popular. When Redux became a lot popular. So
Actually,
Not
what
really.
I'll say, context was there all along, but it wasn't it was always under the experimental tag. Like it wasn't like in the docs from React docs saying that go ahead and use it. They used it internally. It was there in the docs, but never as mainstream as it is now. So that is why context is not used as much. Also, it has its pitfalls, but yeah, that is one of the primary reasons why I feel it is lagging behind. Sanket, you were saying something.
Redux uses context. Redux is built on context. So, but it was
Yes.
not easy when we had class components. It was not very easy to use it. So what Redux adds is that it pulls out only a part of the entire tree, and then with the use of HOC that comes out of the connect function, it only does a partial re-rendering, which is not really possible when you're directly using context. So you have to be extra cautious when you are using context directly, because it might end up in a lot of re-renders and ultimately slowing down your app. With Redux, all those things are taken care of. But with the hooks API of use context, it only has got easier to use something like context.
like after version 16 was
Yeah,
announced.
16 after 16.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
All right,
Okay.
let's move ahead. All right, this is again something on the similar lines. I mean, what is a Jamstack?
I like Butterstack.
Sanket, Shankodeep likes peanut butter stack, right? I've seen you having a lot in the office.
It's more jam now, but yeah, Jamstack, I think, Sanket, it's what we discussed earlier, right? More along the lines of static site generation, and then like because I haven't really worked with Jamstack per se, but what I believe from what I've read is that it is along the lines of Gatsby and Next.js. So do you have any more details around that?
So Shanko, if you use create React app, that's a Jamstack.
That's a Jamstack, correct?
Oh, well.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So anything.
Jamstack is like JavaScript, APIs, and any markup.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
the underlying principle is that Jamstack doesn't need a backend environment to run. So you can statically, any app that you can statically serve, that can be called as a Jamstack on web. So something like create React app, when you build it, it doesn't really need a backend. You just need a static CDN sort of thing just to serve the files. And once it loads on the screen, it does its magic by making API calls and then populating the pages. Something like Next.js initially it was not Jamstack, but with the option of static site generation that creates one HTML file per route. So it starts, we have an option of like building Next.js app into a Jamstack. So if you don't use the server-side capabilities of Next.js, you can publish a Jamstack website using the SSG option as static site generation. And that, so when we talk about something like docusaurus or Gatsby, these are Jamstack by default because these give you HTML files and then loads up on the screen and then makes API calls. But Next.js by itself is not really a Jamstack. Create React app is.
All right, makes sense.
All right. Let's see if we have any questions here from the audience or not. Again, we have a question, which one is the best? We'll talk about it later, Santosh.
We can have hours and hours of discussion and still
Yeah.
not have an answer on that. So,
all right. So, I mean, is it that the need for the state management, state management solutions came up with, rising popularity on Jamstack?
Yeah, I think with the front-end solution, we definitely need something like a state management. But when we have the backend solution, we have shared state, right? So in that case, we might not need a global state management. With Jamstack, it becomes more or less mandatory.
Makes sense. All right. So now let's go on to see what options do we have when it comes to state management solutions for our front-end applications. Most popular we have been talking about, which has become, which has taken place of the state management word, that is Redux. And what other options do we have?
Shanko.
yeah,
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was a big fan of Redux initially when I used it because, to understand the Flux pattern is something which, for us to use Redux, we need to get on board with the Flux pattern and know how exactly it is working and the functional paradigm that it brings along with it. So that is something which I liked a lot. And then also the sense of control it gave us, as in that we know where our actions are, we have our sagas, the thunks, whatever we are using. And then, okay, we define our actions, there are reducers, yeah. But then as and when the apps grew and the number of files grew, we realized that is it really worth all that hassle? Like, I just need to show the user a loader that I'm fetching a list of products. Why do I need to make changes to 6 files for that? So that is the reason I kind of fell out of love for Redux, if that's a phrase we can use. But with Redux Toolkit, I don't know how many of us have used it. It might, I really like it, or even though I haven't used it, I have read the docs and I have seen a couple of talks. I like it a lot, but I have moved on. I'm sorry. I very much prefer something like Zustan now. Also, Mobex React I have used, not MST. So maybe if MST I use, I'll be on Sanket's side as well. I'll move over to MST. But Mobex React is also something which I liked a lot. But yeah, I hear that MST is better than this. But yeah, for now, my option would be Zustan or something like Jotai, which is very closely related to Recoil, only better documented. But yeah, that is my, and context, if we can use it very well. But then yeah, if you are using context with all the features and all, you'll need to make use of use memo, use callback, and need to know the internals of hooks pretty well to use it. So yeah, that would be my preference in order.
So, Shanko, you mentioned Zustand and Jotai is something that you are interested in.
Yes, yes. So stand and
Okay.
Jot. Actually, they are from the same group or same person, is what I
Mm-hmm.
am led
Mm-hmm.
to believe. So yeah.
Right. I think Zustand goes really well when it comes to functional philosophy, and it's very much on the lines of React itself, and the available hooks make it like really easy,
Yeah,
right?
it's just like you're using useState, but on a global level. So that's how simple it is to use. So that's something I like a lot.
Correct. Yeah. I think Redux is really good. That's whenever you want to do something like low level stuff, go ahead and use Redux. And for most of the cases in Redux, I think the 90% of the use cases is covered with Redux toolkit itself. So it starts behaving like data modeling, and you can package things into smaller states using Redux toolkit. So you don't have to do like three different files, one for dispatch action and then reducer and then updating the state. All those things are handled in one single file. That's Redux toolkit. So it's more of a wrapping of Redux, which is beautiful. I like it. Zustan again. Zustan is very similar to Sync State API that we have built internally, but it's also a bit different. Mobex and Mobex State tree. I think this is something I think we should make this not in this list, because this is a bit of different pattern. All these patterns are based on functional programming paradigm, but Mobex on the other hand, it's a bit different. This is more of sorry, I'll bring it.
Object oriented.
Yeah, object oriented paradigm, right? And it works with references and all those things, but the Surface API, it makes it really easy. Like you just are initial like early days of coding when we used to do something like X++, and then it just used to work, right? You can do the same thing with Mobex, and that's why I really like the API of Mobex. It looks like mutation on the surface, but it is really not. In fact, it uses setter and getter proxy to update the state. So internally, it behaves like in a very similar way how Redux and all these functional paradigms work. And for me, Mobex state tree is like the perfect, is like the marriage of object oriented pattern and functional pattern. And I love this pattern. I love this pattern mainly because uh, with functional programming, I've seen this, like you always need to take care of indexes yourself. Like whenever you're building even something like a to-do app, you want to toggle some, say, a particular to-do item. So in that case, we would have to pass an index with all these things. But with object-oriented paradigm, you can create a class, say item, and then create a function called as toggle in the class itself, and then just call the toggle function. It just toggles it. And that's the beauty of Mobex and Mobex state tree, that you don't need to care about that. You can define like these smaller data models and just work on those data models, and it automatically forms a tree and takes care of like all those functional programming paradigms. Uh, and that's why I have a huge love for Mobex state tree and patterns like that. And it also does not care about, I think all these things don't care about the React's UI. Context does up to some extent, but all these things, they don't really care about React. And we have a mapping for maybe in the form of a hook or an HOC or something that connects it to React. And same thing goes with this one. But overall, if I have to build an app where I want to structure the data and also get all the typings, and that's a separate topic, like how do we type these things, we'll have to like write a bit more if you want to like structure the data and add custom types. These things also come inbuilt with Mobex state tree. Like you define your model and you get a static time type checking, dynamic type checking, and like everything in this one. And that's why I have a huge love for Mobex state tree altogether. Again, it works only for the 90% of use cases, and the ultimate answer definitely is it depends. But yeah, that's a basic understanding of like when to use what and how to choose a state management library. from me.
let's
Sanket,
do a similar session what we did. I mean, in the previous session, let's list down all 5. I mean, most of the mostly used 5 libraries, and then discuss about pros and cons of each, similar to what we did for.
I think we should do a 2-hour session on these 5 or 6 state management libraries.
Yeah, probably.
That's a very good topic.
yeah,
Yeah.
maybe pull out the best bits of all of this and create another state management, because why not?
That's a super interesting topic. We'll try to be unbiased.
Yes, yes. Sanket, talking of bias, have you heard of EMER? Because Zustand with EMER would feel very similar to like this OOP plus functional approach. If what we use, because if we use EMER.js, because then also we don't need to worry about index. We can just directly go to that object and say this dot boolean is equals to true. So
Sync
I'm
state,
sure
sync state uses Redux
EMER.
with EMER. So sync state
Yes.
is built on top of it wraps Redux, but on the surface you get a mutation based API that is based on EMER's philosophy, or it uses EMER altogether.
Yeah, that would be nice for people
Yeah.
into.
So just to add, this is my shameless plug. This is not that a lot of people use, but I use it for most of my apps. Like if I have to do stuff, I would go ahead and use sync state. But again,
Saurav has another question.
yeah, go ahead.
How about RxJS?
Oh, it reminds me of that Yamaha bike for some reason.
Is Saurav still using Angular? That's why.
I guess so.
Yeah, sort of. I've never used RxJS with React at all, or with anything.
I believe one of our clients used to stress on RxJS a lot. I think that's where Saurav is getting this idea from. He used to stress
Probably.
that streams are the best things that can happen to you. Don't need to worry about anything. If you think of state in terms of stream, think of everything as a stream. So we had a running joke, but we never implemented RxJS. So that's where we left it at.
I tried really hard to get you need to unlearn things, right? And RxJS is that mindset that you need to unlearn things and then start off. Like when I started with use effect, I always used to think in terms of component life cycle. But I saw this tweet by Ryan Florence. He says that use effect is to just make the changes of state on DOM or the side effects, and then that changed everything. Like I stopped thinking in terms of life cycle. So it's something similar to that. Like RxJS think in terms of stream. I think Flutter has a pattern similar to this. I think block pattern or something, which is based on streams, right? But I have a hard time understanding that.
Pranav has something to say here. So app level lightweight Redux for app data and some necessary dirty work, and more emphasis on component structure, simple object models for data calculations, which negates the Redux abuse.
I think that's a very good idea.
Yeah,
Keep
correct.
something like, say, theme level data, like something like dark mode, light mode, plus the logged in user and shopping cart. Only maybe these 3-4 things at the app level, and then do everything at the component level. So that's also a good approach and clean approach, I would say.
Correct. All right, let's move ahead. Now, I mean, when it comes to serverless applications, I mean, where does state management lie there? How do we make use of, I mean, mixing and I mean, when we have serverless applications, when we have different options like does Redux or maybe another state manager fit in with those applications?
Yeah, as far as serverless is concerned, I don't think that should affect our choice of state management, what we have been discussing, because serverless in the end, it just gives us the data, right? It's more of saying that the server isn't here, but this is the data you get irrespective. So handling it in the front end is eventually what we are doing, because like I'm using AWS Amplify, which falls in the serverless category, but then it really makes no difference to me when I use it like for any other app. So that is I don't know, from my experience, not going to make a difference. But yeah, for like when we talk about mixing and matching, like say context plus jumpstart or context plus Redux, that is something I've seen people do. I've seen an example of people using Mobex plus Redux in an app, which I've seen, and then I've tried to unsee it for a long time, but I couldn't. But then yeah, that's that's been my experience. So I think context we can have for a basic level of, say, dark mode data. If we need dark mode, maybe just put it in a context somewhere where we can access easily from our app, and then still use Zustand or Redux. So that will be a good example of using context plus another external library. So that's from my experience. Ankit, what do you think?
I agree to all your points, Ranko. I agree. Like serverless, it's the same thing. Like it doesn't matter for the front end app, right? It's like any CRA is a serverless app. We would structure it like any other app, and context is needed for sure because all these libraries they depend on context. So context is for sure needed. If you want to use context specifically for your app alongside anything, that's also totally fine. But mixing Redux and Mobex is like a third world war happening in your app. So avoid doing that. There might be use cases if you're building like large scale apps that has like different routes and different use cases per route, then it makes sense. So something like say builder X. So if I want the editor part, so I can, for the editor part I might need a total different state management solution. But for the rest of the app that is like profile data and things like that, then probably we'll just, I'm good with Mobex State Tree or Redux itself. But as far as it loads with like lazy loading and we have like proper code splitting so that users don't get affected with the bundle size, it's fine. As far as you have an agreement among your team members, okay, this is what I'm going to use and this is what your team is going to use, and here is the split between modules and routes, totally fine.
I think I mixed two questions here. One was actually for the serverless application. Maybe we can cover it later. This was mostly, I mean, how, when we, I mean, how we can make use of two different approaches, two different solutions, and can we mix and match them, and what are the trade-offs, right? So, I mean, as both of you said, mixing is fine, and if I'm not wrong, mixing, I mean, both of you tell that mixing and matching is okay with different applications, right?
Should be avoided as far as possible, I would say. But if there is like drastic difference between two different routes, two different sections of the app, then I think it's okay. You can mix it.
All right. Fine. Any more points to add, Sanko?
No, I think Sanket makes sense. Yeah. Like if you have two separate teams working on two different parts of the same app, have performed drastically different functionalities, then they're free to use it. But yeah, not preferred in my opinion.
Great. Now, next and probably an important one, make before selecting a state management library. When do we say no to Redux and yes to MST?
Sanket, place you first.
Yeah, I think the first thing that people usually consider, I would not consider that, and that's the most famous factor when it comes to choosing any library, not just state management, is the knowledge of the team, knowledge and experience of the team. I don't keep it at number one. I usually keep it at like third or fourth factor. But usually people go by this, which is not a good practice, I would say. Learning these libraries and understanding these libraries don't take a lot of time. It's if you understand how to code and how to architect any particular state or any app per se, it should be the last option. It takes a day or two for anybody to learn get up and running and understand and structure your app. That's one thing. Other than that, I think definitely, like, if you have like good documentation available, if you have enough examples, that's also part of documentation itself. If you have community around it, and if you understand the underlying philosophy and the design principle, I think this goes a bit over here. And if there is a need of, if you want to contribute to it, or maybe fork and like make changes to it, so that is like flexibility of modification. uh, I think these points, I would, if I have to do it in the order, I would say, yeah, I would put these things in the same order. Yeah, Shanko.
I have one more addition. I think right at the top should be the number of stars it has. No, not quite.
Popularity.
Yeah, not quite. Popularity in the sense it's covered when Sanket says community. I think that's what he means. Popularity and the amount of support it has. Suppose you're stuck and you do a search, you should be able to find answers in Stack Overflow and GitHub issues. We don't want to start a project with a brand new library and then get stuck in the middle of nowhere. So that's something which would be a bit higher in my opinion. Also, I would see the ease of use. Like Sanket says, knowledge and experience of the team is not there, but how long would it take for someone to, like, how similar it is to the basic, for me to use it, how well versed I am in, not specifically this library, but the patterns that it follows. Because when I like to say empathize from a product owner, I would not want my team to spend 1 week just learning a new library. So that's how I'm looking at it. But yeah, that's also something like it shouldn't, like Sanket said, anyone who knows to code will be able to learn it. But yeah, we need to take that into account as well, how easy something is to use, because I think most of the libraries that we're talking about here are good and get the job done. But yeah, the underlying principle, if we are strongly a fan of one specific principle, then there's no point choosing the other one, right? Because it might not be a good fit. So that's where I come from. But yeah, documentation and examples are always there, right up there.
So do we also take the type of application that we are building into consideration while choosing a library?
Yeah, I think we missed that. That's point number one, right?
Yes. Yeah, because what I was trying to say is something like Builder X with Sanket and team built, we need multiplayer support, right? So there, something like Sing State would fit in perfectly. I think that's what they built it for. But then, yeah, that's also a very important point. We need to see what exactly we are trying to solve and then look at the solution. Yeah, I don't know how we missed it, but that's there.
Yeah, I think that's number one. That should be number one, like use case, right?
So how does it matter? Like if we have to take an example, quick example.
So if you are bringing in the entire Mobx State tree, that depends on Mobex, and also I think has a dependency on EMER just for a counter application. Doesn't really make sense. I think if I have to do a counter application, I'll just use context or maybe just local state itself. But if I have to, as Sonko mentioned, if I have to do it for Builder X, I would go ahead and choose Sing State because that has a shared state in the front end and the back end. It has undo redo capabilities and a lot more. If I have more of a, say, simple shopping cart, right, that's shared across the app, then probably I'll go ahead and maybe introduce Redux or maybe just use context. So it a lot depends on the use case.
Perfect. Rightly summed up.
Should we also have boilerplate here somewhere?
Probably, yeah. That fits in there.
Yeah, I think that comes when I say ease of use, how easy it is to
Yeah.
use. I think I tried to cover that there as well.
But boilerplate is more of like the lines of code, right? So
Number of files and lines of code,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, that's there actually.
I think that should be important.
And how soon you have to ship the product, that should also be considered.
I think that's covered in fourth point
Yeah,
itself,
yeah.
learning curve.
Perfect.
Great.
Right.
I think this is
we'll
very
already-
important. This is the most important part of the today's talk. Like
Mhm.
this is like use these things, question everything. Don't just go and blindly go and use a particular library.
Right. We've
So I
already
think we still
extended the
don't have
session.
answer to the question. The person who asked which is the best one. So now he
We'll
has the
get to
answer.
it. Let's quickly move ahead. We have already like extended the session. Okay, the question that I mixed earlier. I mean, how
So
does
I think
state
we have
management?
comments coming in, right? Can we see the comments once?
Right, I'll pull up the important ones. So we have Aditya, sorry, others telling this. Don't need to save state anywhere if you use native base. Just use the awesome hooks provided out of box.
We have things for like light mode, dark mode, and some low level controls here and there. So thanks, Adarsh.
So people are also talking about streams. Saurav's after Saurav's question.
Yes, streams are great. I know. Like I understand. I love the philosophy, but hard to understand the use case. I mean, we have use cases, but that's a separate topic. We can talk about it later.
Others also says MST lacks the first point, documentation.
I think their
Not
documentation
really.
is
Yeah,
good enough. Yeah.
correct. So Anurag has a question. Which, I mean, he asks, how does BuilderX manages multiplayer state? Like how do you make sure multiple user state is being correctly synced with design?
So we use something like it's called a sync state library that we use. It's based on JSON patches. So JSON patch is something like an intent that acts on an existing state and then makes changes on the object. So we use JSON patches as an action on the local state, and the same JSON patch is also transmitted to all the connected users, and then all the users they update their local state on their systems. And so it uses Redux internally, and then we have like the JSON patches that goes as action inside it. And with the use of EMER.js inside sync state, it becomes really easy. And any changes in the document, it's based on like I want to make a change at this path, and this particular thing should be changed from this value to that value. And with that series of information, we can construct an empty object to the entire like current state of the application, of all the layers and all the components and their nested properties and whatnot. You can watch the talk, Anurag, that I gave at React Europe about JSON patches, React Native Europe, actually.
All right. Let's move ahead. So that's the question. I mean, we already answered it, that it doesn't change much. I mean, when the state management is considered in serverless applications. Now, I think the most important question of this session. Now we have understood that how important state management is when I mean how to use it, when like which libraries are I mean better suited for what scenarios. Now coming to the question, do we actually need a state management solution to be implemented in our library, and if yes, when do we introduce such libraries? Is it while bootstrapping the application, or I mean whenever the need arises?
I think we
And we are
get,
also
yeah.
we should also I mean consider, I mean, does it impact the delivery speed of the team?
I think with any like even like small projects, you will need a state management solution because you have to share state across different parts of your app. So I think that's a decision that we should make early on. And it also, like whenever we are building an app, we usually have a vague idea what we are going to build, right? And that's enough information most of the time to judge like which type of state management library do we need. And I think for most of the apps, like medium sized app to large size app, we will need that. Even for smaller apps, we usually need it. And it's good to decide early on the type of application that we are building. Shanko, your take?
Yeah, I agree. I really agree to this point because when we first tweeted this talk, we said that we might not need a state management. Drop it in when we need it is how we worded it. Like I think one of the tweets. But I think that might not be the best solution because what happens is that once we are into the application, suppose we have made 2-3 screens using the local state and heavy prop drilling, and then from the fourth screen onwards we decide to use a state management library. And what happens is that in two separate places we are filing two separate patterns, right? So and then when if a new developer gets onboarded, then he is confused which pattern to follow. Then the other option is that we refactor the first pattern to match it to the global state management, which would affect the delivery. So what I'm saying is that if we have a long-term vision, if we can look ahead 2-3 months into the application and we can make a call to add it, it's better to just add it, even if it looks too contrived in the beginning, saying why do we need it just for two screens? But it is a job that needs to be done earlier. So yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So let me just add it here. Sorry. Yeah.
Also, there's an article from Ken C. Dots. I think most of us know him. He says that why we really do not need a state management library and how React in itself is a state management library with use state and context. So I'll probably share the link with everyone. We can take a look at it. So that will he tells us how we can use context in such a way that we can avoid using any libraries at all. So that's also something that's very useful, which I found. So others might as well take a look at it as well.
So
Makes sense.
sometimes we fall into a situation where, when we start a project, we start with just working on the HTML and CSS part of it, and not bothering too much about the data layer at that point of time. Uh, so should it be a usual practice where we introduce state management solutions from beginning, or when actually the data part needs to be integrated? People usually fall in, uh, fall between these questions.
I didn't get your question, Atul.
So what approach we take? Like sometimes for a project, what we do is we just work on the visual aspect of the application initially, just the HTML and CSS part, and not much of JavaScript involved. So should we start with actually building React components and uh, deciding props of that particular? Does it really matter when it comes to state management?
I think state management is an integral part of how you design your app. So everything should be considered, and
From the
it should be
beginning.
in the initial phase itself. Yes.
All right. So Saurav has another question where he asks, any tips for managing the state in some patterns to have minimum renders?
I think there are a lot of practices that we can do. We can use memo and also understand the library that you're using. If you're using something like Mobex, then it's very performant and it does not re-render a lot of things. If you're using something like a functional programming paradigm, then definitely something like use memo becomes really important, and the structure of the app should be normalized, right, when we are using uh, something like Redux, because nested data structure is not something that functional programming works well with, and it should be in a flatter structure with IDs and all those things in the place. So yeah, I think these things reduce the number of re-renders.
Perfect. So let's take questions from the audience now. Please go ahead and type in your questions if you have any. Meanwhile, we can talk about the conclusion, what we conclude from today's session. Sanket? Oh, he has his answer.
Yeah, it depends. So it depends on a lot of factor. I think the most important factor is what type of app we are going to build. That's number one.
I think
Yeah.
this should be the conclusion part.
Yeah, I think this is very important. Like, try to come out of the biases and try to give an unbiased look at the current requirement and the types of solution that's available, and go from there. People in the dev community, outside the dev community, they start to have strong inclination with the things that they use, be it something like React Native, Flutter, or web, or Python, and whatnot. So the bigger picture here is that come out of that and then use something that makes more sense. Learning does not take a lot of time, and even for the teams or individuals, I think uh, coding and all these things are not that difficult. So makes sense. Shanko, what do you think?
No, that's exactly what I thought. It depends on the use case that you're trying to solve, right? So it's not like it's, I think you tweet about it a lot, is to not feel about any technology so strongly that it blurs your vision. That we should not think that, okay, I am going to use Redux no matter what, or I am going to use Justan no matter what. Look at the problem that we have on hand and maybe try to explore. We might be missing out on something that we do not consider because we are too biased. So yeah, that's a very good point. Like, look at the use case and then try to make a decision. That would be more helpful.
Great. All right, I think it was a good session, Atul. Overall, I think we had a lot of knowledge sharing. I love it. I think we should do it more and try to keep it active.
Yeah. So any I mean, someone from the audience can tell us what they would like to discuss in the next session probably, and we can keep that into consideration.
So I don't think people might have it like instantly. So go ahead and join the Discord channel. It's learn.thetopgeek.com, and you'll find a link to the Discord channel. And we can have more discussions of this type, and even like more advanced topic or more beginner friendly topics around it. So yeah, Atul, any more updates on the beginners guide that you're preparing?
So it's still in the what do you say? Initial phase itself. Yep, initial stage only, and we need a lot of iterations on that. And once it is there, we'll have the notification sent in the Discord channel.
All right.
And also, I've sent the link to the learn.topgeek.com in the chat section here. So please go ahead and check out and join the Discord channel.
All right.
And keep interacting.
Yeah, I think good session. Yeah, thank you everyone. Thank you for listening, and yeah, thanks Atul for hosting it. Yeah.
Before we close it, we have few questions. Can we take that up?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
So we have Viraj, who's asking how to reduce rendering time.
I think there are great articles available that talks about like performance with React and reducing rendering time. We should avoid any expensive operation that should be outside the React's reconciliation, and put it in a thread or maybe outside the React's render cycle itself in the same thread. That also works. There are multiple ways of doing it. Next question goes to Shanko.
What is the next question?
Yeah, can you tell me some good projects we can make?
Yeah, first thing, if you make BuilderX, then we would have probably learned about all the state management libraries, something like BuilderX. But on a more serious note, I think the different types, the basic ones that all of us make, right? E-commerce, I think that's the one which a lot of us do. Then something would be like an online game time, if you're building a Ludo or maybe something like that, where you need more live interactions, more I would say the pub sub pattern, if you're trying to follow, that would present a different kind of a challenge, because you need to manage the state across two screens. So I would say the more these are the two examples that I could think of, but yeah, there would be more, not something that comes right now, but yeah, I'll probably list it down in the Discord channel for everyone to see. But yeah, that's there.
So the next one is, what's the best practice to persist app state on page reloads?
Just put it in the localist
Local storage.
yeah, and then you use it, hydrate it on the upload. Pretty standard practice, nothing fancy.
Great. I think that's it. We have no more questions in the chat section. So yeah, great session. Thank you, Sanket and Shankadeep.
Thank you so much, Atul. Yeah, I think we
Thank you.
should talk on Discord going forward. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Great then. All
I
right.
think we have also got the next topic. Like we'll talk about, and it would be more of like a coding session. We go ahead and see the examples of all these 4 or 5 state management solutions out there and compare it one-on-one, and the pros and cons and the use cases for each of them. I think that would be super cool to have.
That would be a longer session, I believe, right?
We'll try to squeeze it down, Shanko.
Just to do applications or something. But yeah,
I think coding wouldn't be there, but maybe if we can have like some examples
just
over there.
look at examples, like not build it, but have them pre-built and then just analyze them.
Yeah, or maybe have
similar to what we had in the previous session.
But a bit more interactive, Atul. I think if we have the code ready on Code Sandbox or somewhere, so that we can change things and show it to the people, that would be super cool. Yeah,
we will work on that.
Yeah, we can
come up with the similar session. We'll try
all right,
to make
thank
it
you.
as interactive as possible.
Okay, great. All right, thank you everyone for listening and interacting. Peace out. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.